I had planned the hike for weeks. It was something I'd been thinking about ever since I got a few days off work and wanted to get away from everything. People, city noise, phone calls, stress. I picked a trail I had only seen on forums and Reddit threads, the West Ridge Trail in the southern part of the National Forest. It wasn't a popular spot like some of the bigger parks, which was exactly what I liked about it. People said it was quiet, underused, but still well-marked and scenic. I parked my car at the edge of the trailhead just past noon on a Thursday. The sun was high but soft, filtered through the tall pines around the gravel lot. Mine was the only car there. I had 3 days' worth of supplies in my pack. My tent was lightweight, my food was dry, and my water bladder was full. I had backups for everything: flashlight, maps, even a backup compass, even though my phone had GPS. I was trying to be smart about this. I wasn't some new hiker who wandered out in running shoes with a granola bar. I had done this before. The first day was fine. The trail went through a long stretch of switchbacks under a thick pine canopy, then opened up to a rocky ridge with beautiful views. The air was cool and smelled like dirt and bark. There wasn't much sound except wind through the trees and the occasional creak of branches high above me. I didn't see anyone else all day, which was what I'd hoped for. I set up camp in a small clearing just before sunset. I cooked my meal, hung my bear bag properly, and went to bed early. It was the second day where things started to change. I woke up around 6 a.m. The morning was chilly and gray. I boiled water for coffee, ate oatmeal, and packed everything up. I checked my map. According to it, I'd pass a small lake in about 6 miles. Then I had a choice: stay on the main trail or take a side loop that was supposed to offer better views and eventually rejoin the main route. Most people online had taken the main trail, but a few said the loop was safe and even better if you had the time. I had the time. The signpost for the split was old and partly rotted. The side trail veered off at an angle that looked less worn than the main trail. Still, it was marked with faded orange paint on the trees, and the path was visible enough. I followed it. The trail narrowed after a while. Shrubs scraped my pants. The forest felt denser. I saw no recent footprints. After about 2 hours, I passed a rusted trail marker almost buried in weeds. Then nothing but trees for what felt like miles. Still, I kept going. My phone had a weak signal, but I downloaded the offline map the night before. The GPS showed the trail bending east and eventually turning back north to meet the main route again. I figured I was halfway. That's when I noticed it. A feeling. Something subtle. Like I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. It's hard to explain, because there wasn't a sound or movement that gave it away at first. Just a prickling on my neck. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing but wind. I kept going, slower this time. My boots crunched on the dry leaves. I looked back a few times, but the woods were still. Then I heard it, very faint. A branch snap, not like a big crack, but like something small stepped on a stick. Maybe 30 yards back. I stopped immediately. I waited. Nothing. I told myself it was a deer, maybe a raccoon. That made sense. But I knew how those sounded, and this felt different. Still, I wasn't ready to panic. I moved forward again, more cautious now. I kept checking over my shoulder. The trees were packed tightly together in this stretch. The trail thinned until it was barely a path. Just faint patches of trampled dirt between roots and moss. I checked the GPS again, and that's when I noticed my dot hadn't moved in the last 10 minutes. It said I was still in the same spot even though I'd walked at least a quarter mile. I stopped, took out my compass. The needle spun for a moment, then settled. But it didn't match the direction I thought I was heading. Something felt off. I turned in a slow circle. Every direction looked the same. Pines, ferns, dry undergrowth, no signs. The orange blazes on the trees had stopped showing up a while back. That's when I heard it again. Not just one sound this time. Two. A quick footstep like a shuffle and then silence. I spun around, heart pounding now. I stared hard into the trees. Nothing. No shape, no shadow. But I felt something. That feeling again. That I was being watched. Followed. I started walking faster. I didn't run. I knew better than to run blindly in the woods, especially off-trail. But I moved quickly, head turning every few seconds, trying to spot any flash of movement. I didn't hear anything else for a while. I tried to calm myself down, told myself it was paranoia, maybe a trick of sound, maybe even a bird hopping on a branch. But deep down, I didn't believe that. My body didn't believe it either. I was sweating even though it was cool out. By late afternoon, I was completely off the trail. I hadn't seen a blaze in over an hour. The GPS wouldn't load properly anymore. My compass showed I was heading north-northeast, but it didn't seem to match the terrain anymore. I was in a steep ravine now, the trees so thick I could barely see the sky. I hadn't heard anything else behind me for a while, but I still didn't feel safe. I moved for another half hour until I found a flat spot near a rock face. I was too tired to go further. I figured I'd set up camp here, eat, rest, and try again in the morning. That night was the worst of my life. As soon as the sun went down, the forest went dead quiet. No insects, no breeze, just stillness. I stayed in my tent, flashlight off, eyes wide open. Every creak of a tree or rustle of a leaf outside made my skin crawl. At one point, around 2 a.m., I heard something soft, like a shoe scuffing dirt, right outside the tent. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. It didn't speak. It didn't breathe loud. Just that one noise. Then nothing. I waited for maybe an hour before I dared to unzip the flap and look out with my light. There was no one there, no footprints, but something had been there. I was sure. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, I packed up in 5 minutes and started moving again. I didn't even eat. I didn't care about the GPS anymore. I just tried to go west, toward where I thought the main trail would be. But the land made it impossible. I kept getting funneled into gullies, tangled in brush, blocked by rocky slopes. I was losing energy fast. I started tripping more. My legs felt like rubber. Then I found something that scared me more than anything so far. A fire pit. It was fresh, not mine. It wasn't there the day before. Small circle of stones, blackened center, burnt sticks. It looked no older than a day or two, and next to it an old boot print, larger than mine, heavier tread, not mine, not old enough to be washed away by rain or time. Someone else had been here, maybe still was. I didn't sit down. I didn't rest. I turned away and moved in a different direction. My pack started to feel heavier with every step. I drank the last of my water that afternoon. My legs cramped. I had to stop once to dry heave behind a tree, but I kept moving. I didn't want to stop anymore. I didn't want to stay still. Late that day, I heard a plane, faint, high above. I looked up and saw it just as it disappeared over the trees. I screamed. I waved my arms. Nothing. It was gone. That night, I didn't put up the tent. I just wrapped myself in the rainfly under a log overhang. I didn't cook food. I didn't even close my eyes fully. I kept my headlamp in my hand, thumb on the button. Sometime just before dawn, I heard something again. Footsteps. Closer this time. More than one. Slow. Steady. Not a deer. Not a raccoon. I turned on the light and sat up fast. Silence again. Just my own ragged breath. I scanned the woods in front of me. Nothing. But I felt it. I wasn't alone out there. I packed up before the sun rose and kept moving. My hands shook. I was running low on food. My feet were blistered. I hadn't gone to the bathroom properly in 2 days. I was breaking down fast. And then I saw it. A trail sign. Half-rotted, bent sideways but real, with a faint arrow and a mileage marker carved in the wood. I followed the direction it pointed. Within another hour, I found the main trail again. White, clear, packed dirt, well-marked trees, even a faint boot path. I'd never been so relieved in my life. I followed it for the next 6 hours, stopping only once to drink from my water filter at a stream. I didn't eat. I didn't even rest. I just walked until I saw the parking lot through the trees. My car, still there, still alone. When I unlocked the door and sat down, I looked back at the trailhead for a long time. Then I saw something move, way back down the trail. A shape, could have been a tree trunk, could have been a person. It didn't step forward. It just stood there, still. I didn't wait. I started the car and drove. The ending clear and realistic. I reported what happened. It was mid-September when I decided to take a solo hiking trip into the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. The days were starting to get shorter, and the nights had a bit of bite in the air, but the weather was still decent. I had time off work, I had been feeling mentally drained, and I needed to get away from people for a while. I'd done hikes alone before, nothing too extreme, usually 2 or 3 day trips, but this time I planned to stay out for a full week. I picked a section of the Bitterroot Range that didn't see as much traffic. There was a long loop trail that started near Painted Rocks Reservoir and went deep into the backcountry. I planned to deviate off-trail after the second day and camp beside a high-altitude lake I'd seen on topo maps. From there, I'd bushwhack a route through a narrow pass and eventually reconnect to the main trail 5 or 6 days later. I packed light but smart. A high-quality sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, iodine tablets, a titanium stove, and my little pot. I brought 2 knives, a small hatchet, and bear spray. I carried a GPS unit and an old map just in case the batteries died. I had a spot beacon clipped to my pack shoulder strap in case things went really bad. I didn't plan to use it, obviously, but it was insurance. I parked my truck near the trailhead just after dawn on a Sunday. The lot was mostly empty. There was a small sign-in box, so I scribbled my name and trip dates just like I always did. I had no cell service, so I sent a preloaded message from the beacon to my brother letting him know I was starting. Then I hit the trail. The first day was easy. The air smelled like pine and cold rock. I passed one couple heading the opposite way and then saw nobody else. The trail meandered through forest and open alpine meadows. I made good time and camped beside a creek just a few miles from where I planned to go off-trail the next day. I built a small fire just for warmth and boiled water for some freeze-dried chili mac. I sat on a flat rock and watched the last of the sun bleed over the hills. I remember how quiet it was. No engine noise, no voices, not even any birds near sundown. Just the wind in the trees and the creek gurgling over smooth stones. That first night was fine. Cold but fine. I woke up once to pee and heard something moving in the underbrush nearby, but it turned out to be a deer. I could see its silhouette in the moonlight, ears flicking. The next morning, I broke camp early and started my off-trail route. The terrain wasn't easy, but it wasn't awful either. Mostly steep slopes with deadfall and loose shale. I was careful with my footing. Every step was deliberate. The silence got thicker the deeper I went. I passed through patches of dense forest where the light barely touched the ground, and then through open highland areas where the wind blew strong enough to push my hood back. By late afternoon, I reached the lake I'd picked out on the map. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. Cold, clear, untouched, surrounded by cliffs on 2 sides and open alpine slope on the other. I pitched my tent near a boulder, boiled water, and watched the water turn orange from the sun's reflection. That night was when things started to shift. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning when I woke up. Not because I had to pee, not because I was cold. I just woke up. It felt sudden, like my body had heard something before my brain did. I stayed still. My ears were straining, trying to hear something through the walls of my sleeping bag. The air inside the tent was dead quiet. No wind, no insects, just silence. Then I heard it, a crunch. Not a squirrel or a rabbit. A heavy crunch of boots or paws on loose gravel. Close, maybe 20 or 30 feet from the tent. Then another. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. I slid my hand toward the bear spray and pulled it next to me inside the bag. I listened for several minutes. Another crunch. Then silence again. Then 2 more steps. Whatever it was walking slow, like it was trying to be quiet but wasn't completely successful. It circled about halfway around the tent, then stopped. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. No growling, no snorting. Nothing moved the tent fabric. Just those slow steps. Then it moved away. The steps got quieter. Eventually they stopped completely. I don't know how long I laid there listening. Maybe 2 hours. I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn finally came, I unzipped the tent slowly and got out. My boots were still there. No tracks I could see, just pine needles and gravel. I hiked a wide circle around my camp looking for prints or scat, but didn't find anything obvious. I told myself it was probably a curious elk or a lone deer, maybe a bear passing through. I almost convinced myself. I packed up and continued the route I had planned. The next stretch took me up through the narrow pass. The wind there was stronger, funneled through the rock walls. The trail was non-existent, and I had to climb over sections of jagged granite using my hands and knees. By late afternoon, I made it over the top and started descending into the other side of the valley. The slope here was even steeper, more shaded. Dense spruce and larch made visibility hard. I slipped once on wet moss and landed hard on my side. It knocked the wind out of me, and for a second I thought I might have cracked a rib. I just sat there catching my breath, thinking about how far I was from help. I made camp early that night. I was tired, sore, and spooked. I picked a spot next to a rock face and made sure the tent was tucked behind a row of trees for some cover. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to advertise where I was. I ate a protein bar cold, zipped up inside my sleeping bag, and tried to convince myself the night before had been just a one-off thing. But that night was worse. I woke up to a sound I can still hear in my head. Something was sniffing the side of my tent, right next to my head. The thin nylon crinkled slightly as it pressed in. A long, slow inhale. I couldn't move. I didn't even grab the bear spray this time. I just stayed still. After maybe 10 seconds, it stopped. Then there were two distinct footsteps, soft but heavy. Whatever it was stepped away from the tent. Then another pause. Then it walked around the back. I could hear twigs snapping. More sniffing. It circled the whole tent. Then it left. Again. This time, I sat up, grabbed the knife and the bear spray, and kept them in both hands until daylight. I didn't sleep again. When the sun rose, I got out and did another search. Nothing. No tracks. No broken branches. No hair. But I knew something had been there. Something big. Too big to be a deer. Too quiet to be a moose. And not afraid of me. That day, I changed my plan. I was supposed to hike west toward the next ridge, but instead I turned south, trying to make my way back toward the main loop. I figured if I cut across the valley, I'd hit the trail again in a day or so. I was done with the backcountry. I wanted out, but the terrain was worse than I expected. The forest was dense, and deadfall blocked most of my way. I had to climb over trees as thick as barrels, and my legs were starting to shake from the effort. I barely made 5 miles that whole day. Worse, I started seeing signs that something was following me. First, I noticed branches broken along the same route I had taken. Fresh ones. Not natural breaks, clean snaps, as if something heavy had stepped on them. Then I started seeing scuffed patches in the dirt. Faint boot prints, but wider than mine. Barefoot? Couldn't tell. But they weren't my tracks. I knew exactly where I had stepped. The worst part came late in the afternoon. I stopped to rest and eat a bar. When I put my pack back on, I turned to continue and noticed a small pile of stones right in the path I had just walked. 5 small stones stacked in a tiny, uneven tower. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. That meant someone or something was close, right behind me, and they were trying to scare me. It worked. I didn't run. I couldn't risk breaking my leg out there. But I moved faster. I ignored the pain in my knees and the burning in my thighs. I walked until it was almost dark, then found a hollow in the ground beneath some dense shrubs. I didn't pitch the tent. I didn't want to be seen. I just rolled into my sleeping bag and laid still, hidden, with the bear spray clutched tight in my hand. That night, I heard nothing. Maybe that should have comforted me, but it didn't. The silence was too perfect. No wind, no owls. No movement, like the woods were holding their breath. I left before sunrise. By mid-morning, I saw the trail. I nearly cried. It looked like salvation. A long stretch of dirt packed down by boots and animals, winding off toward civilization. I checked the GPS, and I was still at least 2 days from my truck. But I didn't care. At least I had a clear path. At least I could make real progress now. But even on the trail, the feeling didn't leave. I kept stopping to look behind me. I kept listening for footsteps that didn't belong to me. Every sound in the woods made my heart jump. Every squirrel, every branch creak. That afternoon, I found another stone pile, right on the edge of the trail. This one had 7 stones, balanced carefully, like a totem. I kicked it over and kept walking. I don't think I've ever looked at a tree line the same way again after that day. I used to love being alone in the forest. That sense of quiet, of total separation from people and their noise, it was like medicine for me. Living in the city wears on you over time. The car horns, the sirens, the yelling neighbors, the endless rush of everything. It never stops. That's why every few weekends, I would pack my bag, grab my boots, and head out into the woods. That time, it was early September. The weather was just starting to cool, and the leaves hadn't yet turned, but the crispness in the air hinted that fall wasn't far off. I had chosen a trail system out in a remote part of a national forest a couple hours from home. I had never hiked that specific area before, but I'd read about it online and found a few YouTube videos of people who had done parts of it. It wasn't popular or touristy, and that's exactly what I was looking for. No noise, no people, just me in the woods. I got to the small gravel parking area around 7 a.m. There were no other cars there. That made me feel good. I did a quick check of my gear, map, compass, GPS, though I like to rely on the paper map more. A good knife, emergency kit, first aid, 3 liters of water, trail mix, a freeze-dried meal for later, and my sleeping gear in case I ended up staying out overnight. I wasn't planning to, but I liked being prepared for anything. The plan was simple. Take the red trail north for about 5 miles, cut across using the unmarked game trail I'd read about in a forum, and loop back around to the parking lot from the east via the blue trail. It would be about a 10-mile round trip. Nothing too aggressive, just a quiet day in nature. The first few hours were peaceful. Birds chirped. A few squirrels scurried up trees as I walked. I saw fresh deer tracks in a patch of mud and paused to admire the silence. There was a kind of stillness out there that felt like pressing a reset button on my mind. No phone reception, no notifications, no obligations. Just the steady sound of my boots on the dirt. Around noon, I reached the part where I needed to veer off the marked red trail and find the unmaintained route. It wasn't officially part of the park system anymore, but hikers said it was usable if you were good with a compass and didn't mind navigating. I turned off the trail and began bushwhacking through the undergrowth. It was denser than I expected, but I was still confident. I marked my map and double-checked my bearings every 20 minutes. After about an hour and a half, I knew I should have reached the blue trail, but I hadn't. I checked the map again and realized that I had probably overshot the crossing. I figured I would keep heading east for another half hour and then stop to reassess. I remember stopping to take a drink of water and feeling that odd awareness, like when you suddenly become conscious of your own breathing or heartbeat. The forest had grown quiet. It was always quiet, but this felt different, like something was waiting. I scanned the trees, but there was nothing, just trunks and leaves and the occasional bird up high. I shook it off. Sometimes being alone in the woods can mess with your head. You start thinking about survival stories or mountain lion attacks. Your brain makes noise where there isn't any. But then I noticed something. Footprint. It wasn't mine. The tread was different, deeper, wider, probably a men's size 12 or 13. I wear a 10, and it was fresher than mine, pressed into a patch of soft dirt that I had just passed. My own prints were nearby, but this one stood alone, slightly off the direction I was walking. That made no sense. I hadn't seen anyone. There had been no cars at the trailhead, no voices, no distant echoes of hikers or campers. Yet here was a footprint headed more or less in the same direction I was going. I tried to tell myself it could have been old, maybe from a ranger or someone who came through a day or two ago. But the depth, the sharpness of the edges, it looked fresh, like someone had stepped there not long before me. I looked behind me slowly, just woods, a slope of earth and tall skinny pines. No movement, but the feeling in my gut had shifted. I kept walking, trying not to speed up too much. I didn't want to seem nervous, even though no one was watching. At least I hoped no one was. Every 15 minutes or so, I checked my map. I tried to laugh it off. People hike alone all the time. It's probably just someone else who had the same idea as me. But then I found another footprint. Then two. This time they were more direct. In a small clearing, I could see the trail of them moving from one edge to another, cutting across my own path. The weirdest part was how silent it was. I mean, dead silent. Normally, even in deep woods, there's some background noise, birds, wind, insects. But the forest around me felt like it was holding its breath. It wasn't long before I realized I was being followed. I didn't see anyone at first, but I started testing little things like suddenly changing direction, doubling back 100 yards, or standing still behind a tree for 5 minutes. That's when I saw him. Just a glimpse. A figure maybe 100 feet away. Tall, broad shoulders, standing partly behind a tree. He wasn't wearing bright colors or gear, just dull clothes that blended into the forest. He didn't move, just stood there, like he was watching me. I turned and walked away calmly, even though my heart was hammering in my chest. Once I was out of his sight, I started to jog. Not a full run. I didn't want to trip or crash into something, but enough to put distance between us. I thought about using my GPS to try to orient myself, but my hand was shaking too much to use the small buttons. I didn't know what the hell this guy wanted. Maybe he was lost and just being weird. Maybe he was trying to scare me for fun. Or maybe something worse. The forest was now a maze. I had lost all sense of direction. The sun was hidden behind clouds, and I couldn't tell east from west anymore. I tried to climb a slope to get a better view, but the trees were too thick to see anything meaningful. Just more endless green. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath behind a fallen log. My chest was tight, and I could feel sweat running down my back. I listened hard. I could hear faint crunching somewhere behind me, very soft, like someone trying to move slowly without being heard. I stayed behind the log for maybe 10 minutes. Every couple minutes, I would hear another faint crack or shuffle of leaves. But I never saw him again. He was always just out of sight. I started to think about what would happen if I couldn't find my way out. I hadn't seen a marked trail in hours. The battery on my GPS was starting to blink low. The sky was getting darker with clouds, and I wasn't even sure how far I'd gone off my planned route. That's when I made a decision. I would stop trying to find the blue trail and just go straight west. That would eventually bring me back to the red trail if I hadn't gone too far north. I pulled out the compass and started walking directly west, sticking as close as I could to that direction no matter what. But the man followed. Every half hour or so, I would see him again, always distant, always watching, never getting closer, but never disappearing. Sometimes I'd turn quickly, and he'd duck behind a tree like he didn't want to be seen. Other times, I'd catch just enough of a glimpse to know it was the same guy. Tall, no pack, no gear, just standing, following, waiting. I couldn't understand his purpose. If he wanted to hurt me, he could have done it already. If he was just trying to scare me, he was doing a hell of a job. But there was something too deliberate about his movements. He never closed the distance. He never ran. He just kept following. By late afternoon, my water was almost gone. My legs were tired, and my mouth was dry. I hadn't eaten anything since morning, and the trail mix in my pack felt like a joke now. I didn't want to stop. I felt like if I stopped again, he'd come closer. Eventually, I saw something I hadn't seen in hours. A ribbon of red paint on a tree trunk. It was the red trail. I almost collapsed when I saw it. It meant I could follow it back south to the parking lot. It was still probably 3 or 4 miles, but it was a marked trail. I could follow blazes instead of trying to navigate through the endless trees. I turned onto the trail and started hiking fast. I didn't run, but I moved quicker than I had all day. My heart was still pounding. I kept checking behind me every few minutes, expecting to see him, but he was gone. I never saw him again after I found the trail. No more glimpses, no more footprints, no more movement. I reached the gravel lot just as the last light of the day was fading. My car was still the only one there. I got in and locked the doors immediately. I sat there for a long time, just breathing and looking out into the trees, half expecting him to step out. But he didn't. When I got home that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how far off course I'd gone. I pulled up the GPS log and tried to trace my route. The scariest part was realizing how deep into the woods I'd gone. I had veered much farther north than I thought. And the area I ended up in? It wasn't even part of the park system. It was technically private land, but there were no buildings or houses, just miles of old timberland. I don't know who that man was. I don't know if he lived out there or was just wandering like me, but he didn't belong on that land anymore. I left home just after 5 a.m. It was still dark outside, but I wanted to get an early start. I had planned this hike for a couple of weeks. I needed time away from work, from noise, from everything. I had picked a remote area about 4 hours outside of town, in the middle of a wide, dry valley with some rough terrain, winding trails, and thick brush in some places. It was called Devil's Back Canyon, though I never thought much of the name. It wasn't marked well on most public maps, but I found it through an old blog written by a guy who hiked and camped in isolated places. I liked that kind of stuff. No tourists, no phones, no city sounds. I packed my gear the night before, just the essentials. A backpack with 2 large bottles of water, some snacks, energy bars, a basic first aid kit, a flashlight with backup batteries, a map I had printed out from an old forum post, a compass, and a lighter in case I needed to start a fire. I also had my folding knife clipped to my belt. I wore a thick, long-sleeved shirt, some heavy-duty hiking pants, and my most reliable boots. I brought an extra pair of socks in my bag just in case. The plan was to park near the southern trailhead, hike about 8 miles through the main route, make it to a small rocky ridge that was supposed to have a great view of the whole canyon, then loop back on a different trail that cut through a more shaded part. The whole thing was about 14 or 15 miles. It was a full-day hike, but I was in good shape and used to long hikes. The first 2 hours were perfect. The sun came up slowly, and the morning light spilled over the dry rocks and low shrubs like it always does in the desert. The ground was firm but uneven, lots of loose rock and sand, but nothing I couldn't handle. The only sounds were wind brushing through dry grass and the crunch of my boots against the dirt. I stopped around 9 a.m. to drink some water and eat a bar. I checked my map and compass. Everything was going as expected. I was maybe 3 miles in. The sun was getting stronger, but I had sunscreen on and a cap. The heat wasn't bothering me yet. Around mile 4, things started to change. The trail narrowed, and the dirt turned into more gravel and uneven stone. I moved slower, watching where I stepped. At one point, the trail curved sharply around a steep drop. One bad step and I could have fallen 20 or 30 feet down a rocky slope. I kept one hand close to the rock wall and took my time. I passed through a dry creek bed. It was filled with fine dust, scattered twigs, and some old animal tracks, maybe deer or coyotes. I followed the path northward. I was supposed to cross this creek bed and then make a left around a large boulder to stay on the trail, but something looked different. The trail markers were faded, or maybe I missed one. I pulled out the map again, but it didn't show much detail here. I walked a little further, thinking I'd find the ridge soon, but after 20 more minutes, I knew I had gone off trail. I stopped and looked around. The rocks looked unfamiliar. There were no clear signs of a path anymore, just flat desert, sparse bushes, and tall, dry grass in some spots. I turned around, thinking I'd just head back the way I came, but when I walked for 10 minutes in that direction, I didn't see the creek bed. I must have veered off slightly. I told myself to stay calm. I wasn't lost exactly, just a bit turned around. I had my compass and plenty of daylight. I knew the general direction I came from. I just needed to retrace my steps carefully. I took a breath, adjusted my pack, and walked slowly, watching the ground for signs of my footprints or familiar landmarks. After about an hour of walking, nothing looked familiar. Everything in that part of the desert looked the same grayish rocks, same dry plants, same tan dirt. I didn't want to admit it, but I was getting worried. I had already used up one of my water bottles. The sun was directly overhead, and the heat was intense now. Sweat was dripping down my back, and my shirt was sticking to me. I decided to climb up a small ridge to get a better view. It was only about 15 feet tall, mostly loose rock, but I took my time and got to the top. I scanned the horizon. Far off in the distance, I thought I saw something like a narrow dirt path or clearing. It was probably at least a mile away, maybe more. I wasn't sure if it was a real trail or just a natural gap in the shrubs. Still, I figured it was worth checking out. I made my way toward it, cutting through thick brush and uneven ground. The heat was relentless. There was no shade at all. Every step felt heavier. Dust stuck to the sweat on my arms and neck. My water was running low. I was halfway through my second bottle now. It took almost an hour to get to the clearing. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't a trail. It was a dry wash, a place where water must have run through during rains. There were animal tracks and broken branches. No signs of people. No footprints, no wrappers, nothing. I sat down on a flat rock and pulled off my pack. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to eat another bar and sip the last of my water. I knew I had to find a way out soon. I wasn't going to die out here over a wrong turn, but the panic was growing. I kept thinking about how remote this place was. No cell signal, nobody around for miles. Nobody even knew I was in this specific canyon, just that I had gone hiking that day. I hadn't told anyone the name of the trail I picked. I kept walking in the same direction, figuring eventually I'd hit a road or get back to the trailhead. I moved slowly. Every few steps I'd stop and listen. Just wind, just the same crunch of gravel. My boots were covered in dust. My mouth felt dry and sticky. I was running on fumes. The sun was lower now, late afternoon. I had maybe 3 or 4 hours of daylight left. I climbed another small hill, hoping for a better view, and that's when I saw something. A structure, far off, maybe 2 or 3 miles away. It looked like an old shed or cabin, half collapsed, sitting on a slope near some scrubby trees. Couldn't believe it. I stared at it for a full minute to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Then I started moving toward it carefully and slowly. Took forever to reach it. The terrain was rough, and I had to push through dry brush and thorny plants. My legs were scratched and sore. My head was pounding. By the time I got to the structure, the sun was dropping fast. The building looked abandoned. Weathered wood, missing roof panels, a broken window, and half the front door was hanging off. Still, I stepped inside, hoping for shelter or even just a place to rest. The inside was empty except for an old wooden table, a broken chair, and a pile of rotted firewood in one corner. Dust was everywhere, rodent droppings too. It stank of age and dryness, but it was cooler inside. I sat on the ground, my back against the wall. I pulled off my boots and socks, which were damp and dirty. My feet were blistered. I rested for maybe an hour, though it felt longer. My body was sore, my lips cracked. I had no water left, no energy either. I knew I couldn't spend the night there. It was better than being outside, but not by much. When I stood up, I stumbled. My legs were stiff and I felt lightheaded. I checked my map again, though it was useless now. I couldn't tell where I was. The compass pointed north, but that didn't help much without a known reference point. Still, I decided to keep going. I followed the downward slope behind the cabin, thinking downhill might lead me toward a road or water source. It was a gamble, but I didn't have options. As the sun dipped behind the canyon wall, everything turned gold and orange. Then shadows crept in fast. I kept walking even as the light faded. I used my flashlight, holding it in one hand and watching every step. The beam flickered once, but the batteries held up. I walked for over an hour in the dark. Every sound made me freeze. At one point, I thought I heard something behind me, twigs snapping, but when I turned, there was nothing. I stood still for a full minute, heart racing, then kept going. Just when I was thinking of stopping for the night and lying under a bush, I saw a flicker of light. At first, I thought it was a trick of my flashlight, but then I saw it again. A real light, like a porch light or a vehicle. I moved faster. I didn't care what it was. I just needed help. I pushed through a cluster of thorny plants, slipped down a short hill, and there it was, a chain link fence, and beyond it, a small ranger station. It was dark inside, but there was a truck parked outside. I banged on the fence and then made my way around to the front gate, which was open. The place was locked, but I found a spigot on the side with a water hose. I turned the handle and water came out, cold, clean water. I dropped to my knees and drank straight from the hose, soaking my face and arms. I stayed there until morning. When the rangers arrived, I was sitting against the fence, dirty, exhausted, but alive. They gave me water, a blanket, and took me inside. I told them everything. They said I had ended up over 9 miles from the main trail. I had wandered off into a part of the canyon that wasn't used anymore, not since a flash flood years ago wiped out the side paths. They said I was lucky, that most people... It was the second week of October when I decided to take a break from everything. Work had been non-stop for the past 3 months, and I was burnt out. Emails, phone calls, deadlines. I felt like I hadn't even taken a full breath in weeks. I just needed some time alone. No people, no noise, no pressure. I'd been thinking about going on a solo hiking trip for a while, and I figured this was the perfect time. The weather was still decent, the mountains were quiet this time of year, and the fall colors were out. That always helped me feel calmer. I picked a trail system in the northwest part of the state. It wasn't too far, maybe 4 hours by car, and I'd read that the place had a network of long ridgeline hikes, intersecting valleys, some hidden streams, and even old fire roads that were mostly unused now. It wasn't a national park or anything, just some Forest Service land with trails that went for miles and miles. Not a lot of people went there anymore, especially in October. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed everything I thought I'd need. 2 days worth of food, water, a filter straw, a small tent, warm clothes, power bank, knife, flashlight, lighter, map, compass, GPS on my phone too. I wasn't new to hiking. I'd done overnights before, but this was the first time I was doing it entirely solo, so I triple-checked everything. I even left a copy of my route and expected return time with my cousin. That was just common sense. People get lost out there all the time, especially in the hills. I left home before sunrise and parked at the trailhead around 9 a.m. The air was cool, and the leaves were a mess of orange, red, and gold. It looked like a painting. The sky was clear and blue. I stood by the car for a few minutes, just breathing in that cold forest air. I didn't even realize how badly I needed it until I finally let my shoulders relax. The plan was to hike 10 miles north along the Ridgeback Trail, spend the night at a small clearing I marked on the map, then loop around east and south down to the Holloway Stream and follow it back toward the trailhead the next day. Total distance was about 23 miles. Not easy, but not crazy hard either. I started walking and everything felt good. The trail was dry and mostly flat at first, just gradual climbs, nothing too rough. I stopped here and there to take pictures of the forest floor, the leaves, the way the sun cut through the branches. There were squirrels, maybe a few deer, but no other hikers. I liked that. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to think about anything but the dirt under my boots and the crunch of leaves as I moved forward. By late afternoon, I was 5 hours in. I covered a little more than 10 miles. That's when I reached the spot I had marked to camp. Just a patch of flat land under some pines, far enough off the trail to be quiet, but not so far that I'd forget where the path was. I set up my tent, got a small fire going with twigs and dry pine needles, and made myself a simple meal from the food pouch I packed. I sat there with my back against a tree and watched the fire until the sun went down. The forest got cold fast after dark, and everything turned quiet. So quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I didn't sleep great, but I never do when I'm camping. I woke up a few times just from the wind or the sound of a branch falling somewhere. That kind of silence makes every little sound feel louder. But nothing strange happened. No animals, no issues. When morning came, I felt fine. A little stiff from the cold, but nothing serious. I boiled water for coffee, packed up my gear, and looked over the map again to plan my second day. My goal was to find the Holloway Stream, which ran through a narrow valley about 7 miles east. Once I got there, I'd follow it south until I hit the lower trail system and make my way back to the car. The first part of that day's route involved taking a smaller connector trail, marked on the map as Ridge Cutoff, which wasn't maintained anymore but still showed up on my GPS. That's where I made my mistake. The Ridge Cutoff was hard to find. The entrance was half covered in brush, and there was no sign. I almost missed it. I had to check the GPS 3 times before I was sure that this overgrown patch of woods was the start of the trail. It didn't look like anyone had used it in years. The map said it was only 3.5 miles, just enough to get me across a ridge and into the next valley. I figured I'd move slowly and stay alert. First, it was okay. The trail was narrow and uneven, but I could still follow it. There were old trail markers on the trees, faded paint blazes that looked like they hadn't been touched in a decade. The path twisted and climbed up a rocky hill. My GPS showed I was heading the right direction, so I kept going. Then the trail started to vanish. It wasn't sudden. It just sort of thinned out gradually, until the line of dirt and leaves I was following faded into patches of grass and loose stone. I stopped to check the GPS again, still going the right direction. I figured it would pick up again once I got over the ridge, but it didn't. I kept walking. The ridge was steeper than I expected, and I had to use my hands to scramble up in a few places. The rocks were slick from morning dew, and the wind was starting to pick up. When I finally reached the top, I turned to look back. The view was incredible. Trees for miles, all glowing with fall colors, and not a single person in sight. I should have taken a picture, but I didn't. I just stood there for a second, breathing hard, and kept going. That was where things started to go wrong. The trail was gone, completely gone. No blazes, no dirt path, just brush, loose rocks, and trees in every direction. I thought maybe if I kept going down the other side of the ridge, I'd see it again. Trails disappear sometimes, happens when storms come through or when no one uses them for years. I figured I'd pick it up again on the other side. I walked for nearly an hour downhill. No trail. I tried to follow the map, then the GPS, but the slope was uneven and filled with deadfall. Huge trees that had fallen and tangled themselves into walls of limbs and branches. I had to climb over and around them. Every few minutes, I checked the GPS and the map again. I was getting closer to the stream, but the terrain was slowing me down. Then the GPS died. I'd been using it more than I realized, and the power bank I brought hadn't charged properly the night before. I must have left it out too long and the cold drained it. I still had my map and compass, but I hadn't used them in a while, and I wasn't totally confident anymore. I was tired, scratched up from branches, and frustrated. The worst part was that I didn't want to backtrack up the ridge because that climb had taken everything out of me. I didn't think I could make it back up with a full pack, so I kept going. By midday, I found a small stream. I thought it might be Holloway, but I wasn't sure. It was narrow and slow, barely more than a trickle. I followed it for a bit, hoping it would widen or join a larger body of water. Instead, it just disappeared into a swampy area, all thick mud and cattails and brambles. I tried to circle around it, but the ground was soft and sucked at my boots. I slipped more than once, got mud up to my knees. My legs were shaking by then. I hadn't eaten enough. I was getting dizzy. I sat on a log for a while, ate a protein bar, and tried to calm myself down. I wasn't in danger, not yet, just off course. That's what I kept telling myself. But something was bothering me, something I didn't want to admit yet. I had no idea where I was anymore. It wasn't just being off the trail. I didn't recognize the land. The trees were taller, thicker. The terrain was strange. There were no signs of people, no footprints, no wrappers, no broken branches or fire rings. Just forest. Miles and miles of forest, all looking the same. I kept walking, slower now, just trying to find something familiar. I used the compass to head south, since that was the general direction I needed to go. I figured if I kept moving that way, I'd eventually hit one of the larger trails near the base of the ridge. But the forest didn't cooperate. I hit another slope, steep, muddy, and littered with loose rocks. I lost my footing halfway down and slid several yards on my side. My backpack caught on a root and yanked my shoulder hard. I screamed without meaning to. The pain was sharp, like a knife under my collarbone. I sat there in the dirt, breathing hard, trying to lift my arm. It moved, but not easily. Not broken, but maybe dislocated or just badly strained. That was the moment I started to feel scared. Really scared. My heart was pounding, and I was sweating even though the air was cold. I didn't know how far I had to go. I didn't know where the trail was. I couldn't trust my GPS anymore. My shoulder throbbed, and my legs were covered in mud. My water bottle had spilled during the fall, and the rest was in my pack, buried under gear I couldn't lift with one arm. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I just sat there, shaking, until I felt like I could stand again. I moved slowly after that. Every step felt like it took 10 times the effort. The forest was darker now, not because the sun was setting, but because the trees were thicker. Pine needles blocked out most of the light. It felt like I was walking through a tunnel. It was late October when I decided to take a long solo hike through the mountains in northern Idaho. The weather had been holding steady for a while, cool but not cold yet. Clear skies during the day, dry trails. I had a 3-day window off work, and I wanted quiet more than anything else. I'd been on edge for weeks. No real reason, just that kind of tension that builds up over time. I needed to get out, get away from noise, people, screens, everything. I picked a trail I had never done before. It was deep in a national forest that not many people visited. I didn't want busy. I wanted space, silence, something I could feel alone in. The trail was about 16 miles one way, out and back, and passed through rough terrain. I had read that after the 10th mile it got narrow and a bit dicey, mostly hugging the side of a ridge. That didn't scare me. I wasn't new to hiking. I parked at the small trailhead lot around 8 a.m. on a Thursday. Only one other car was there, and it looked like it had been sitting a while. Dusty windows, dry leaves stuck under the windshield wipers. I guessed it belonged to someone on a longer backcountry route. I checked the tires on my pack, the weight felt fine. Food for 3 days, water filter, layers, first aid, a flashlight, knife, headlamp, small tent, map, and a printed trail description. I didn't bring a GPS. I liked doing things the old way when I could. I put my phone on airplane mode and shoved it deep into my pack. The first few hours were smooth and pleasant. The air had that sharp, dry bite that comes before winter. The trail climbed steadily through thick pine forests. The smell of pine and cold dirt was strong and grounding. Squirrels darted around. I saw elk tracks and once heard something big move through the trees off trail, maybe a moose. I didn't stop to look. I just kept moving. By noon, I reached a small clearing where I stopped for lunch. I sat on a flat rock, ate a granola bar, jerky, and a piece of dried fruit. Everything was still. Even the wind was calm. I didn't see another person. There weren't even plane trails in the sky. It felt like being on another planet, one where everything was stuck in time. After lunch, I hiked deeper in. The forest got tighter, the air cooler. The sun moved behind high ridges and didn't reach the trail in some places. Around mile 8, I started seeing signs that the trail wasn't used much. Fallen branches, a few downed trees, faint boot prints in the dirt that looked older than a week. I had to climb over some rocks and tight switchbacks. I didn't mind. I liked that it was quiet, untouched. I kept going until around 4 p.m. and set up camp near a dry creek bed just before mile 10. The ground was flat there, and I had a good windbreak from the trees. I pitched my small tent, cooked instant rice with tuna, and sat outside as the light disappeared. The stars were clear and cold. I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing, a few night insects, and the occasional creak of the trees. I didn't sleep well that night, not because I was scared, just because the forest was too silent. I usually sleep better with some background sound, but out there it was like a vacuum. At one point I thought I heard footsteps outside the tent, but when I unzipped the door and looked, nothing was there. I chalked it up to animals or my brain playing tricks. By the next morning I felt a little uneasy for no real reason, but I packed up and kept going. The trail narrowed past mile 10. It rose higher and started to follow the ridgeline. On the right side, the land sloped steeply down into forest and rock. On the left side, it climbed sharply into jagged hills and boulders. I walked slowly. The dirt under my boots was loose in places, and I had to test each step. Somewhere around mile 12, I found an old boot half buried off the trail. It looked like it had been there for months, maybe longer. The leather was dry and cracked. The sole had mostly rotted off. I looked around out of habit, but didn't see anything else. No gear, no clothing. I didn't think much of it then, though I took note of it in my head. The path became more difficult. There were steep sections where I had to lean into the side of the mountain. One wrong step and I could have slipped and fallen far. I slowed down. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I told myself if it felt too dangerous, I'd turn around. No point in pushing it. I made it to around mile 14 before the real trouble started. There was a narrow crossing ahead, a stretch of trail that cut across a sheer rock face. It looked like part of the trail had broken away, maybe from a rock slide. I saw it from a distance and walked up slowly, checking the edges, trying to judge if I could cross it. The drop-off was sharp, at least 60 or 70 feet down into thick trees and broken rocks. There was a slim ledge, maybe a foot wide, that curved around the rock wall. The other side of the trail was visible, just past a boulder with some tree roots clinging to the rock. I stood there for at least 10 minutes, heart thumping, trying to decide if I should go across. I felt that pit in my stomach start to grow, the kind that told me not to mess around with this. Still, I figured if I moved slow, faced the wall, and kept my weight low, I could probably make it. I'd done trickier spots before, so I started across. I pressed my hands into the rock wall and stepped sideways, inch by inch, not looking down. My boots felt solid. My pack was tight. I didn't rush. It took me maybe 2 minutes to make it across. When I stepped back onto the wider trail on the other side, I let out a shaky breath. My legs were tight with tension, but I felt good. I felt alive. That feeling only lasted for about 30 seconds, because the next thing I saw was a backpack. It was lying just off the trail, partly hidden by bushes. The color was faded, but it looked blue or green. The fabric was torn in places. I stepped closer and saw the zipper half open. Inside were a few old camping items, a rusted pan, crushed water bottle, some moldy fabric that might have been a sleeping bag. Everything looked like it had been sitting there a long time. I felt my chest get tight again. I looked around slowly. No one. Nothing. Just trees, rocks, silence. I didn't touch the pack. I crouched and looked closer. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just abandoned, like someone dropped it and never came back. I suddenly remembered the boot from earlier. It didn't feel random anymore. I decided that was far enough. I didn't want to keep going past that point. I hadn't seen another soul for almost 2 days. The trail was getting dangerous. And now the boot, the pack, the feeling like I was being watched. I started back. When I came to the narrow ledge again, my legs felt less steady. Going back across was harder. My left foot slipped once and sent a small shower of dirt down the cliff, but I caught myself. I didn't look down. I didn't stop. Once I made it back across, I picked up the pace. I kept hearing faint sounds behind me, like twigs breaking. Every time I stopped and turned, it was quiet, but the feeling stayed. It was in my neck, in my shoulders. That pressure, like something was too close, just behind my back. I hiked for hours without stopping, not eating, barely drinking. I made it past the 10-mile mark and got back into the denser forest where the trail widened. I kept expecting to see someone, even just a day hiker, but there was no one. I didn't set up camp that night. I just found a soft patch of dirt near a group of trees and lay down in my sleeping bag with my knife in my hand. I didn't sleep at all. Every sound made my skin crawl. I thought I saw movement more than once between the trees. Could have been animals. Could have been nothing. The next morning, I forced myself up, packed fast, and started moving. My legs ached. My feet were blistered. I was dehydrated and my hands were shaking. But I didn't care. I just wanted out. When I finally reached the trailhead and saw my car again, I nearly cried. The other car, the dusty one, was still there, still untouched. I didn't wait. I got in, started the engine, and drove off without even changing clothes. Back in town, I went to a gas station and sat in the lot for a while, just breathing. I didn't know who to tell. What would I even say? I saw an old boot and an abandoned backpack? That's not a crime. There was no body, no sign of struggle, nothing that would hold up to an investigation. But something wasn't right out there. A week later, I read a local forum post from someone asking about their brother, who had gone missing hiking in that same forest 2 months earlier. He'd never returned. His car had been found at a trailhead, same one I used. I never replied to the post. I wanted to say, I think I found his pack. But I didn't, because I didn't want to be involved. And deep down, I didn't want to go back. Not even to show someone where it was. Whatever happened out there, I didn't want it to find me again. Since then, I've hiked in other places, safer places. I carry a GPS now. I never go more than 10 miles in, and I never hike alone anymore. But sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I see that narrow ledge again in my head, and I feel the dirt slipping under my boot. And I think of the pack, sitting there untouched, like someone had been right where I was. And then I didn't go out there looking for anything. No adventure, no discovery, no soul searching. I wasn't trying to find myself or connect with nature, or any of those reasons people usually give when they go hiking alone into the mountains. I just needed a break. That's all it was. Life had been crowding in on me for too long. I'd been working 2 jobs to cover rent and pay off my car, eating garbage food out of plastic containers, sleeping 5 hours a night, surrounded by the same honking horns, the same apartment walls, the same flickering light outside my window that never got fixed. My phone never stopped buzzing. My body felt heavy and sore every day. And then my uncle passed away. That hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't someone I saw all the time, but when I was a kid, he used to take me camping. He didn't talk much and never made a big deal about anything, but he showed me how to start a fire, how to patch a tent, how to tie proper knots. Stuff my dad never really cared about. After the funeral, I couldn't stop thinking about those memories. The smell of the woods, the feeling of sleeping on the ground, the sound of water running nearby. So I told my boss I needed a few days. Threw together my old hiking gear from storage. Drove 5 hours east until I reached the edge of a national forest I'd read about online but never visited. Parked my car in a gravel lot, shouldered my pack, locked everything up, and just started walking into the tree line. It was that simple. No plan, no trail map. I just wanted to get out, breathe clean air, and not see another person for a few days. The first day was easy. The forest was thick but not too wild. A few worn game trails cut between the trees. It felt like a place people came often but not recently. There were empty soda cans near the first ridge and some carved initials in tree bark. I followed a dry stream bed downhill and found a small clearing where I set up camp. I ate an energy bar, boiled water for some freeze-dried rice, and fell asleep under a sky full of stars. No sounds except a few crickets and wind through the branches. The second day, I woke up sore but clear-headed. My mind felt quiet for once. I packed up and walked further in, moving east toward the mountains. My plan, if I had one, was to keep hiking until I felt like stopping. I didn't bring a GPS or even a phone signal booster. Just a compass, a paper map I barely looked at, and my instincts. I told myself I'd follow the creeks and ridges, and when it felt right, I'd turn around and head back the same way. The trail got steeper. Trees gave way to loose rocks and narrow ridgelines. I started seeing more wildlife. A herd of deer bolting through the brush, some coyote tracks in the dirt, and once, a black bear in the distance that took off the moment it saw me. I kept going. The further I went, the better I felt, like I was finally unplugging something deep inside. I found another spot to camp that night, a flat shelf with a view of the valley below. I slept even better than the night before. But the third day, that's when things started to feel different. I woke up late that morning. Too late. The sun was already high. I never sleep that long outdoors. My watch said it was nearly 10 a.m., and I felt groggy, like I'd been drugged. My whole body was stiff and my throat dry. I checked my water bladder, and it was nearly empty. I must have had more than I thought the night before. I packed quickly and started hiking again, moving uphill toward what looked like a saddle between 2 peaks. The terrain got rougher. The sun was hot and sharp above me. My boots scraped along dry shale, and every step felt like it slid backward an inch. I drank the last of my water by noon, expecting I'd find a stream or snowmelt soon. But I didn't. That whole day, I didn't find a single drop of water. The map in my head said there should have been a creek just past the ridgeline, but when I got there, the stream bed was bone dry, just cracked rock and dust. The pine trees started thinning out, replaced by brush and low shrubs. I kept walking, sure I'd find water at the next bend. Or the next valley. I didn't. By late afternoon, my mouth felt like cotton. My lips were cracking. My skin was hot. I tried to pee and couldn't. I started seeing strange shapes in the rocks ahead, like they were moving. I blinked hard and realized it was just heat shimmer. Still, I kept going. I told myself I'd stop once I found water. I needed it. More than food, more than rest. The land ahead dipped into a small basin, ringed by trees. I hoped there'd be a pond there. Something. Anything. I hiked down the slope, sliding on loose dirt, and entered the basin just as the sun hit the ridge behind me. The shadows stretched long. It got cold fast. That's when I saw the old shack. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't even a full building. Just a small, collapsed wooden structure leaning sideways, half-eaten by moss. I didn't even see it at first. It was tucked behind some shrubs, hidden by shadow. But when I walked closer, I saw the walls, or what was left of them. Nails sticking out, rotting boards, an old rusted stove laying on its side. I walked around it, thinking maybe there was a spring or something nearby. Old structures like that were usually built near water. But there was nothing. No stream, no pond, just more dry dirt and brittle grass. I sat down beside the shack, leaned back against the broken wall, and tried to rest. My heart was pounding. I felt lightheaded. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I knew the signs of dehydration. I knew I was in danger. Then I saw the cooler. It was tucked under a slab of fallen wood near the back of the shack. One of those thick white coolers with a locking lid. It looked out of place. Too new. I crawled over to it, pulled it out, and opened it. Inside were 3 plastic water bottles, all sealed. I stared at them for a few seconds. My brain couldn't even process it. I grabbed one, twisted the cap off, and drank half of it in one go. It was warm, but it was water. Real, clean water. I drank the rest, then opened a second bottle and paced myself, sipping slowly. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe more. The sun dropped below the ridge, and the shadows swallowed the basin. I started to feel cold again. I needed to make camp, but I kept thinking about the cooler. Why was it there? Who left it? Why 3 bottles? I looked closer at the shack. There were footprints around it. Old ones, maybe boot prints. The dirt was hard, so it was hard to tell how fresh they were. But someone had definitely been here. Maybe a hunter. Maybe someone else who got lost. I set up camp nearby, just my bivy sack and sleeping pad. I didn't build a fire. Something about the place made me uneasy, and I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I finished the second bottle of water and left the third in my pack. Then I laid down and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. There were sounds in the trees. Not animals, not wind, something else. Footsteps, slow, crunching leaves, then silence, then again. I held my breath and waited. Nothing. I told myself it was paranoia, my dehydrated brain playing tricks. I turned on my side, pulled my sleeping bag tight, and eventually drifted off. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a scraping sound. Not loud, not close, but steady, like something dragging across wood. I sat up slowly. The moonlight lit the basin faintly. The shack was a shadow against the trees. I didn't move. I just listened. The sound stopped. I waited. 10 seconds. 30. A minute. Then I heard breathing. Not mine. Not an animal's. Human. Low. Slow. Controlled. It was coming from inside the shack. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the dark opening of the shack and listened. The breathing stayed steady for maybe 2 minutes. Then it stopped, and everything was silent. I laid back down, heart pounding so loud I thought it would give me away. I stayed awake until the sky turned gray and birds started chirping again. When the sun rose, I packed up and didn't even eat. I grabbed my stuff, took the last water bottle, and left the basin fast. I didn't stop until I was halfway up the next ridge. Only then did I look back. There was someone standing where my camp had been. Just standing, not moving, too far away to see clearly, but I could make out the shape, tall, broad, wearing something dark. Not a ranger, not a hiker, just watching me. I turned and kept walking. I didn't run. I wanted to, but I didn't. That entire day, I didn't stop. I moved downhill, retracing my steps. I didn't eat. I barely drank. I just walked. And behind me, every few hours, I saw him again. Never close, never chasing, just watching. Once, I saw him from a ridge, standing across the valley below, still as a tree. Once, I found his footprint in the dirt where I'd walked the day before. By the time I reached the original streambed near my first camp, the sun was setting again. I didn't want to camp, but I couldn't keep. I had always liked being alone in nature. There was something peaceful about it. The silence, the air, the quiet rustling of leaves. It made everything feel more honest, more calm. I was never big on crowds or cities. I lived in a small apartment near a city edge, but on weekends I would go out. Hiking, sometimes camping, sometimes just driving out to random places on the map. I didn't always plan much. I just picked a spot, checked for a trail, packed water, a knife, a flashlight, some snacks, and went. That Saturday, I drove to a place I had never been before. I found it on a blog while I was scrolling late the night before. Someone had shared photos of a beautiful trail in a little-known forest area 2 states over. The pictures showed quiet pine woods, mossy ground, and a rocky stream running through some thick forest. It wasn't a well-known park. I liked that. Less people. I got up early, threw on my boots, grabbed my small backpack, checked the GPS on my phone, and started driving. It took almost 4 hours to get there. The roads got worse the deeper I went. 2-lane roads became narrow gravel paths. My phone's signal flickered and then disappeared as I got closer. That didn't bother me. I expected it. The directions were saved offline, and I had a paper map too. I wasn't careless. By noon, I reached the small gravel parking area at the edge of the trail. There were no other cars. The air was cool. Pine needles crunched underfoot. It smelled like wet earth and bark. I locked the car, adjusted my backpack, and headed into the woods. First, it was peaceful. The trail was a narrow dirt path, winding between tall pine trees and thick underbrush. I moved slowly, breathing deeply, stopping now and then to take in the stillness. Birds chirped high above. A squirrel darted across the trail. I felt calm. The trail split in two after a mile or so. There was no sign, just a faint fork in the dirt. I remembered something from the blog post. The guy said he had followed the left fork and ended up by a stream with big flat rocks where he ate lunch. I went left. The trail became thinner, less used. I noticed small plants growing in the middle of the path and more fallen branches. It was walkable, but not something people hiked often. That was fine with me. About half an hour later, I found the stream. It looked just like the photo. Flat rocks scattered along the banks, clear water running over small stones, green moss clinging to everything. I sat on a wide rock, pulled out a granola bar, and ate slowly. I took off my shoes and dipped my feet in the cold water. The sun filtered through the trees, and everything was quiet except for the soft water sounds and birds. I sat there for maybe 45 minutes. Then I packed up and started walking again. There was a trail along the stream that looked like it kept going deeper. I figured I'd follow it for a bit and then loop back. But after about 10 minutes, I noticed the trail fading. It wasn't clear anymore. The underbrush got thicker, and branches started closing in. I figured I missed the actual path and turned back toward where I came from. Only, I couldn't find the same rock I had sat on. I walked up and down the stream a bit, but everything started looking the same. The rocks, the trees, the water, it all blurred together. I tried not to panic. I had a map in my bag and a compass. I checked both. I knew the trail ran roughly southeast from the parking area. I tried to figure out my bearings and started walking in the direction I thought would take me back toward the fork. But the woods didn't look familiar. I walked for what felt like an hour, pushing through brush, stepping over logs, trying to avoid thorny plants that scratched at my pants. I didn't see any trail markers, no path, just trees and undergrowth and more trees. I kept stopping to listen, Nothing but birds and wind. Then something shifted. It wasn't loud, just a feeling, a change in the air. The way the birds stopped chirping, the way the wind seemed to hold its breath. I stopped walking and stood still. I listened hard. First, nothing. Then I heard it, faint, like a twig snapping. Not an animal snap. It was slow, heavy, like someone stepping quietly. I turned around. I saw trees, branches, a broken stump, nothing else. I told myself it was nothing. Could have been a deer, maybe a raccoon. But I felt something strange in my chest. Pressure. I kept walking. More time passed. I was sweating now. My legs were sore. I had scratched my left shin on a branch. The trees felt closer somehow, denser. I tried to keep heading southeast. I checked the compass again, still moving in the same direction. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, behind me, not rushing, just following. I turned sharply. Nothing. I squinted. I scanned the trees. Nothing moved. But the feeling didn't go away. I started walking faster. I kept my ears open. Every few minutes, I stopped and turned. I never saw anything, but I began to notice small things. Branches that were broken at odd angles. Footprints, bare ones in the soft mud. Long, narrow prints. Human. Too fresh. I crouched and looked closely. They weren't mine. I was wearing boots. I didn't know what to think. I kept walking, faster now. Branches whipped at my arms. My hands were dirty from pushing brush aside. My heart was beating hard. I tried to stay calm. Maybe someone else was hiking out here. Maybe I was just tired and freaking myself out. But I didn't believe that. Not really. I stopped again to drink water. My bottle was half empty. I sat on a log and tried to breathe slowly. I kept looking behind me, listening. That's when I saw him, about 20 feet behind me, not moving, not trying to hide, just standing between two trees, not close, not far. He wore dark pants and a long brown coat that hung down to his knees. His face was shadowed under the hood. He didn't move, not even a twitch. I froze. I stared at him, waiting. My breath caught in my throat. I gripped the small knife in my side pocket. Not much, just a folding knife. I felt small, alone. After maybe 10 seconds, I stood up. I didn't run. I turned and walked. Quick steps. Not loud, just steady. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I moved fast. I didn't stop. I walked until my legs burned. I looked at the compass again and realized I had veered more east than southeast. I adjusted and kept going. I checked behind me once. Nothing. I kept going. More time passed. The sun dipped lower. The shadows stretched. I knew I had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. I climbed a small ridge to get a better view, hoping I might spot the road or a clearing. Nothing. Just more forest. My legs ached. My throat was dry. I had some beef jerky and another granola bar in my bag, but I didn't eat. I felt sick. Then I saw something strange. A blue shirt hanging from a branch. It was old, faded, torn down the side. I walked over slowly. It was hooked onto a branch like someone had placed it there. Not by accident. Not blown by wind. It didn't make sense. Near the base of the tree, I saw something else. A small pile of rocks stacked into a pyramid. Not natural. Stacked on purpose. 3 smooth stones balanced carefully. I backed away. Every part of me was screaming now. I moved again, pushed deeper into the woods. I didn't know where I was going anymore. Just away. I knew I was completely lost. I didn't care. I just wanted to be somewhere else. Then I saw another one. Another figure. Farther this time. Just a shape in the trees. Standing still. Then gone. I didn't stop anymore. I moved until my legs could barely lift. The sun was nearly gone. The air turned cooler. I knew I had to find a place to stop for the night. I found a low area near a fallen tree. It had some cover, not much. I cleared a small spot, laid down leaves and branches to sit on, and got out my emergency blanket. I didn't sleep. I sat with the knife in my hand, back against the tree. I stared into the woods. All night I heard things. Rustling, snapping twigs, A whistle, maybe, soft but sharp, like something trying to mimic wind. But it wasn't wind. I didn't move. I didn't sleep. When the sky turned gray, I stood up. My legs were numb. My throat hurt from dryness. I took a few sips of water, chewed on some jerky, and started walking again. I didn't know where I was going, but around noon, I saw something. Wooden posts sticking out of the ground, fence posts, then a narrow dirt road beyond the trees. I ran. My body hurt, my chest burned, but I ran. I came out onto the road, panting. Looking back, I saw nothing, just the wall of trees. Nothing followed. I walked that road for hours until I reached a small house. An old couple lived there. I explained I got lost hiking. I had been planning the trip for months. My work had been eating away at me from the inside. Sitting in front of a screen all day, stuck in a loop of deadlines and noise and pressure. I just needed to get away from everything for a while. I didn't want to be around people. I didn't want to hear traffic or scrolling phones or anyone asking me for anything. I just wanted trees, wind, dirt, and time. I picked an area up in the northern mountains, about 6 hours from my place. It was a place I had read about online. Beautiful views, not very crowded, and good long trails that ran deep into the backcountry. There were multiple loop trails, some marked well and others that were barely visible on old maps. Most people stayed close to the marked parts near the entrance, but I wanted distance. I wasn't going for photos or selfies. I wasn't trying to show anyone what I'd done. I just needed to move, breathe, and disappear for a few days. I packed up carefully. I had a tent, sleeping bag, water purifier, food for 5 days, a small stove, backup power, a physical map, compass, knife, and extra clothing. I had trained for this. I wasn't an expert hiker, but I wasn't a fool either. I had done enough to know how stupid it was to rely on only a phone, especially when signals faded fast once you got past a certain elevation. I arrived late morning, parked the car at the trailhead, locked everything up, and started walking. The first day was perfect. The trail was a bit steep early on but well maintained. Trees thick on either side, big gray boulders with lichen all over them, patches of open sky through the canopy, and that steady rhythm of footstep after footstep on soft earth. I didn't rush. I wasn't trying to beat any record. I stopped often. I let my legs stretch and breathe. I drank water when I needed to. I had set my mind on a place near a small lake about 10 miles in. I'd camp there for the night, then head further north the next morning. I reached the lake just before sunset. The water was still, dark blue and flat, with dragonflies hovering just above the surface. I set up camp on the far side where the ground was flat, cleared out some rocks, and cooked a simple meal. I sat by the edge of the water until the stars came out, then turned in for the night. It was quiet except for the distant croaks of frogs and an occasional soft breeze through the trees. I slept deeply. The second day, I kept pushing north. The trail got thinner and rougher, winding through thick forest. I passed a few markers, old, fading paint on bark, but nothing recent. That's what I wanted. Less people, more space. By noon, I had reached an area that didn't even look like it had been walked in months. The trail narrowed down into what was basically just a rough path between rocks and bushes. I kept my compass close, kept checking my map. I knew where I was going. Around mid-afternoon, I reached a ridge that gave a great view of the valley below. I could see nothing man-made, just green, brown, rock, sky. I remember standing there for a long time, letting the sun warm my face and the wind hit my chest. That evening, I found a small clearing between two ridges and pitched my tent again. I had another simple meal, checked my gear, made some notes on the map with a pencil, and fell asleep listening to the distant sound of a river I hadn't even realized was nearby. The third morning is when the trouble began. I had two options. The map showed a longer trail heading west before looping back south toward the trailhead. That would take 2 days. The other option was a faint trail, barely marked, that cut through a narrow canyon to the south. It was labeled as an old fire service trail, no longer maintained, but still possibly usable. It would shave off a day of hiking. I stood at the fork for almost 20 minutes, going over it in my head. My legs felt tired from the previous 2 days. I had enough food and water, but something about cutting that extra day off sounded good. I chose the canyon. At first it wasn't bad. The trail was rocky but passable. Trees gave way to taller grass and scrub. The path dipped down sharply, winding between high rocky walls. The air cooled as I went lower. The sun disappeared behind the stone. The sound changed. It echoed more. My footsteps sounded harder. After an hour, the trail began to vanish. There were no more signs of old maintenance. No markers, no signs, not even a trace of where boots had passed. The rocks grew slick, almost polished in some places. Loose pebbles rolled under my feet. I slowed down, used my trekking pole more. I didn't want to twist anything this deep in. I kept going. Another hour passed, then another. I couldn't find the trail anymore. I was just walking through a narrow slot between cliffs. The walls got tighter, higher. I couldn't climb out without gear. I was committed to the path. The sky was just a strip of gray above. I checked the map again, but it wasn't helping anymore. This part was barely marked to begin with. I kept looking at my compass. South. Just keep going south. Then it started raining. It wasn't heavy at first, just light, steady drizzle. But in a place like that canyon, rain can be dangerous. Water collects, slides down rock faces, and builds fast. I picked up my pace, careful but trying to move. Then I heard the sound. It was deep, low, a sort of distant growl of water. Not an animal, not wind, just a low rumble that kept growing. I realized what it was a second before it hit. Flash flood. The first wave wasn't huge, but it came hard and fast. Brown, frothy water came sweeping around the bend behind me. I ran forward, slipping on slick rock, scrambling to get to higher ground. I found a narrow ledge and climbed up just in time. The water blasted through the canyon floor, filled with mud and sticks and broken tree parts. It rose fast. I clung to that ledge for over an hour, watching the water roar beneath me. My heart was racing. My gear was soaked. My legs were shaking. I was alone, deep in a canyon with no signal, no clear trail, and now no way back. When the water finally slowed, it was already late afternoon. I carefully climbed down and started moving again, now slower than ever. The path ahead was just wet rock and puddles. Everything was slick and coated in debris. I slipped twice. Once I cut my palm on a sharp rock. The second time I twisted my knee. That was the beginning of the real nightmare. The injury wasn't bad at first. I could still walk, but it was stiff. I tried to put less pressure on it, but the terrain didn't care. There was no flat ground. Everything was angled, uneven, and slippery. My progress slowed. Every hour I got maybe half a mile further. By the time the sky began turning dark, I knew I was in trouble. I needed to find a place to set up camp. I couldn't sleep on wet rock. I finally found a small outcropping just above the canyon floor, barely large enough to pitch the tent. It was cramped, uneven, but it would have to do. That night I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing things. Rocks falling, distant animal sounds, water dripping somewhere above me. I kept thinking about the flood. What if more water came during the night? What if a rock slide happened? I was in a narrow trench with no escape. When morning came, I packed up fast. My knee was worse. It was swollen, stiff, and sent sharp pain up my leg every time I bent it. I kept moving. I had no choice. I rationed my food, drank less water, even though I knew that was dangerous. I was trying to make it out before I ran out of supplies. I don't know how far I hiked that day. Maybe 4 miles. Maybe 5. I limped, cursed under my breath, stopped to rest every 20 minutes. The canyon began to widen slowly. The cliffs grew less steep. Trees appeared again. Then I made my second mistake. I saw a fork in the path, if you could even call it that. To the left was thicker forest and what looked like a dry riverbed. To the right, a faint game trail up a hill. My map didn't show either one clearly. I chose the left. I followed that riverbed for almost 2 hours before I realized it was curving west, not south. I was going the wrong way. Turning back was the last thing I wanted to do, but I did it. The pain in my knee was worse now. My back was sore from carrying my pack. My shoulders burned. My shirt was crusted in dried sweat and dirt. I could smell myself. That night, I couldn't even pitch the tent. I just laid my sleeping bag on a flat patch of dry leaves and tried to sleep under the open sky. The fifth morning, I woke up to animal tracks near my sleeping bag. Not close, but close enough. I couldn't tell what it was. Big, padded prints. Maybe a bear. Maybe something else. I didn't want to know. I just packed and moved. By noon that day, I finally saw something that gave me hope. A fence. It was old and broken in parts, but it was man-made. Wooden posts, rusted wire. I followed it for a while and found a dirt road not long after. Then an old gate. Beyond that, what looked like a maintenance building. Small, windowless, but solid. Locked. No one around. But there was a path leading away from it. A real dirt road. I had always liked the idea of hiking alone. Being away from the noise, away from the distractions, away from other people. It felt like the only time my head wasn't spinning. I didn't have any dramatic reason behind it. I wasn't running from anything. I just liked the quiet. I liked the routine of walking through the woods with no one else around. It started as just weekend hikes near where I lived, but over time I got bolder, started looking for longer trails, more remote places. I planned them carefully. I would read up on the terrain, map out routes, pack properly, check the weather, tell people where I was going. I wasn't careless. That's why what happened didn't sit right with me for a long time, because I thought I did everything right. This story happened in late September 2 years ago. I'd picked a place in the northern part of my state, up near the border. It was about 5 hours drive away from where I lived, but it was worth it. The area was known for its beautiful forest trails, barely used except by a few hunters and hardcore hikers. I had done part of that trail once before, but this time I wanted to go deeper, an extended loop that crossed a ridge and went down the far side before circling back around. I figured it would take me 3 full days if I started early the first morning and pushed a little on day 2. I packed accordingly. Tent, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, water filter, rain gear, knife, flashlight, 2 headlamps with batteries, my phone with offline maps, and a Garmin satellite GPS tracker. I wasn't planning on needing help, but I liked knowing it was there. I reached the trailhead by 6:15 in the morning. The air was cold, and the fog was still thick between the trees. The first few miles were peaceful. There was that heavy silence you only get deep in the woods, where even your footsteps sound like an interruption. I moved quickly but carefully. I kept an eye out for bears, but didn't see any sign of them. No prints, no scat. I did see deer tracks here and there, and once I caught a flash of a buck running through the trees. The trail climbed steadily uphill through mixed pine and maple. By noon, I'd made it to a flat area on a ridge where I stopped for lunch. The fog had burned off by then, and the sun was warming things up. I sat with my back against a rock, eating a sandwich and sipping water. I remember thinking how perfect it all was. After lunch, I kept going. The trail turned narrow for a while, running along the side of the ridge with a steep slope falling away on my left. I was careful with my footing. The trail had clearly seen better days, with a lot of it washed out from rain and snowmelt. But there were still faded blazes on the trees now and then, so I knew I was on the right path. That night, I made camp in a small clearing near a creek. The sound of running water was always comforting. I set up my tent, boiled some instant noodles, and sat by the fire until it got dark. I didn't bother with a journal or anything like that. I just watched the trees shift in the firelight and let my mind go blank. I slept well that night, though I did wake up once around 3 a.m. when I thought I heard something moving nearby. It wasn't loud, just a faint crunch of leaves, but it was enough to snap me awake. I lay still for a while, holding my breath, waiting, but after a few minutes, there was nothing else. Probably just a raccoon or deer. I drifted back to sleep. The next morning was colder. There was frost on my tent. I packed up quickly, wanting to get moving and warm up. The trail started dropping elevation almost immediately, weaving down through thick evergreens into a darker, wetter part of the forest. I remember thinking how different it felt. Up on the ridge, it was open, airy. Down here it was all shadow and moss and silence. I checked the map on my phone at a fork in the trail. One direction went straight down toward a valley and eventually looped around. The other looked like a shortcut, less defined, but it shaved off a mile or two. The map showed it as a faint old service road or logging path. I stood there for a long time thinking. The shortcut was definitely marked. It wasn't like I was going off trail. It had a faded line on the topo map, and I'd made good time the day before. I figured I could afford to try it. I started down the logging road. First, it was fine. A little overgrown, but the path was still visible. Tire ruts filled with water, old stumps covered in moss, everything quiet except for birds overhead. But the deeper I went, the less clear the path became. The trees started to close in and the ground got muddy. I had to step carefully to avoid slipping. I saw no more blazes, no trail markers, just the overgrown remains of an old track that wound down through thicker and thicker trees. That's when the unease started creeping in. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a sense that I was going farther than I should have without seeing the next junction. The ground was uneven and soft, and several times I had to stop to pull my boot out of mud or reroute around a fallen log. I took out my phone again to check my position, but it wouldn't load the map. I tried the GPS tracker. It showed my coordinates, but it didn't match the trail layout on the map anymore. Something was off. I kept walking. I didn't want to backtrack unless I was sure I'd made a mistake. But then I saw something that made my stomach twist. A long stretch of tire tracks, but fresh ones. Not recent, maybe a few months old, but newer than anything else I'd seen. And beside them, boot prints. They didn't look like hiking boots. These were deep, wide soles, maybe work boots. I followed them a while. Then they just disappeared into the undergrowth, like whoever made them had veered off the trail. At that point, I knew I wasn't on a shortcut anymore. This wasn't part of the loop. I was somewhere else entirely. I turned around, or at least I tried to. The path I'd followed wasn't really a path anymore, just a mess of trees and puddles and fallen branches. I followed my own footprints for a while, but they started to fade. The ground here didn't hold prints well, and the soft moss covered everything quickly. I started to panic, not full-on fear, but that cold feeling in your chest when you realize you messed up something you thought you had under control. I stopped walking. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I looked at the GPS again and plotted a direction back toward where the trail was supposed to be. I marked it with a bearing and tried to follow it. That was the beginning of a long, slow slide into something much worse. The forest here wasn't like the one near the trail. It felt untouched, almost like it hadn't been walked through in years. The trees were bigger, denser. There were no signs of human presence anymore. No wrappers, no footprints, no signs of camping. I walked for what must have been 2 hours, pushing through undergrowth, crawling over logs, skirting thick patches of mud. My clothes were soaked with sweat. I slipped and fell more than once. At one point, I twisted my ankle slightly, not bad, but enough to make me limp. I started shouting, not for help, just out of frustration. But there was no one around to hear. Then I found the clearing. It was sudden. Just a wide open area maybe the size of a football field, ringed by trees. In the middle of it was what looked like the remains of a cabin. I stood there, stunned. It wasn't on the map. It didn't look lived in. The roof had collapsed, and most of the walls were just broken beams and planks. Old, grayed wood, almost blending in with the ground. There was no trail leading to it, no path. I walked toward it. I shouldn't have, but I did. I just wanted to see. Inside the remains were rusted tools, a broken chair, glass bottles, a metal stove. Someone had lived here a long time ago, but there were also signs of more recent activity. Empty cans, a blue tarp stuffed into one corner, a plastic water jug, a bundle of paracord. That scared me more than anything. Someone had been here recently, and not just for a night. This wasn't a hunting camp or a day stop. Someone had spent real time here, hidden. I backed out of the clearing fast. I didn't run, but I moved quickly, retracing my steps and putting distance between me and that place. I had no idea who that shelter belonged to. I didn't want to find out. For the next hour, I walked without stopping. I checked the GPS every 10 minutes, trying to correct course. By the time it got dark, I still hadn't found the Real Trail again. I was somewhere on the eastern side of the loop, but miles off from where I should have been. I made camp in a dry spot under a rock overhang. Didn't bother with a fire, just ate a protein bar and wrapped myself in my sleeping bag. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing sounds, twigs snapping, distant thuds, maybe animals, maybe not. At one point, I thought I saw a light moving through the trees in the distance. I turned off my headlamp and crouched, watching it. It was there for a few minutes, bobbing slowly between the trunks, then disappeared. I didn't sleep after that. At first light, I got up and started moving. My ankle hurt more, but I pushed through it. I rationed the last of my food, sipped filtered water. Around noon, I finally saw something that gave me hope. A blaze on a tree. It was faded, almost hidden by bark, but it was real. I followed it, then saw another and another. By late afternoon, I was back on the main. I had always been the type of person who preferred solitude. Some people recharged by being around others, but I was the opposite. I felt calm when I was alone, when everything was still. That's probably why I took up hiking years ago. Being out there in the woods, away from traffic, work stress, and the constant digital noise, it gave me something nothing else could. It started with small hikes, weekend trails just outside the city. But over the years, I wanted more. Longer hikes, tougher ones, trails most people avoided because they weren't clearly marked or because they weren't as scenic. I liked the ones that had no cell signal and barely any people. I liked getting a little bit lost and finding my way back with a compass or a physical map. The more remote the trail, the better it felt. This story happened 2 summers ago. It was early August, the days were long and hot, and I had taken a week off work to disconnect. I had planned a 3-day solo hike in a region I hadn't explored before. It was in a heavily forested part of northern Montana, near the Canadian border. The trail I chose wasn't popular. I had seen it listed in an old backpacking forum, and it wasn't even on the national park's main website. That should have been the first red flag, but it looked real enough. The map showed the trail winding up through dense forest, then along a narrow ridge before looping back down into the valley. About 18 miles total, with some elevation changes but nothing too extreme. I packed everything I usually took: tent, sleeping bag, stove, extra food, first aid kit, water filter, emergency beacon. I always prepared like I was going to be out there for a week, even if the hike was only 3 days. I don't know. Maybe I liked the comfort of knowing I had more than I needed. That kind of thinking saved my life later. I drove up to the trailhead on a Monday morning. It was about a 5-hour drive from where I lived. The last 2 hours were on rough, unpaved roads that climbed into the hills. No signs, no gas stations, just the occasional wooden post with a faded number or arrow on it. I followed my offline GPS until the blue dot landed at the tiny clearing where the trail was supposed to begin. It didn't look like much. No parking lot, just a wide gravel shoulder beside a dirt path that disappeared into the trees. I turned off the engine, stepped out, and was immediately hit by the smell of pine and damp earth. It was quiet, almost too quiet. No birds, no wind, just stillness. I brushed it off. Remote places often felt like that. I left a note on my car dash with the date and estimated return day. I had told one friend where I was going, sent him a pin before I lost service. That was another mistake. I should have told more people. The hike started well. The trail was overgrown in places, but still visible. I made decent time, climbing slowly through thick forest. Everything was green and damp. I passed through dense stands of fir trees, ferns brushing against my shins, and the occasional patch of wildflowers. By late afternoon, I had made it about 6 miles in and set up camp near a small stream. I boiled some water, cooked a freeze-dried meal, and spent the evening writing in my journal. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. I didn't see or hear another human all day. The first night was uneventful, just the usual sounds of the forest. Crickets, the occasional snap of a branch, the breeze in the treetops. I slept better than I usually did out there. But the next morning, things started to shift. When I woke up, the air felt heavier. It was humid and still. I checked my map and GPS, had a small breakfast, and packed up. The next section of the trail was supposed to climb along a ridge that overlooked a ravine. But after 2 hours of hiking, I wasn't gaining any elevation. The trail just kept dipping and twisting through more forest, not matching what the map showed. I pulled out the paper map and compass, checked it again. According to the terrain and tree lines, I was somewhere south of where I should have been. Maybe I missed a fork in the trail? I decided to keep going forward for a bit. Sometimes trails curve back around, but they didn't. The trail got thinner, more overgrown. At one point, it just became a game trail, barely wide enough for a person to walk through without ducking under branches. I tried turning back, but after 30 minutes, I still hadn't returned to the last known trail marker. Everything started to look the same: pine needles, moss-covered logs, the same gray-green tree trunks stretching up forever. My footprints weren't showing up clearly on the forest floor. It was too soft. I was lost. I didn't panic yet. I've been turned around on hikes before. I sat down on a rock, took out my emergency beacon, and turned it on. The light blinked red, indicating it was sending out a location ping. That gave me some comfort. I set it to tracking mode, thinking if I kept moving, someone could trace the path I was taking. That was the plan anyway. I checked the sun. It was almost noon. I had maybe 7 hours of daylight left. I decided to try and make it up to higher ground to get a better view. That usually helped. I pushed uphill, cutting through brush and fallen branches. It was slow going. I scraped my leg on a sharp rock. Not deep, but it stung. I wrapped it with gauze from my kit and kept going. Around 4 p.m., I found a spot where the trees opened up a little, revealing a partial view of the landscape. What I saw didn't help. There was no sign of any trail, no ridges, no landmarks that matched my map. Just trees in every direction. Miles and miles of trees. That night, I set up camp again, near a patch of dry ground beneath a rocky outcrop. I boiled some water, but my appetite was gone. I chewed on a granola bar and forced myself to drink. The air was getting colder. I checked my beacon again, still blinking, still tracking, but no sign anyone had picked up the signal. I told myself it could take time. I slept badly that night, kept waking up to strange sounds. Not animal sounds, more like movement, not constant, just the occasional crack of a stick that didn't fit the usual forest rhythm. I stayed still and listened, but never heard anything come close. The next day was worse. I rationed food. I hiked again, hoping to find something. A road, a signpost, anything man-made, but it was just more woods. More moss. My socks were soaked. My hands were scratched. I started yelling sometimes, just to make noise, to hear something respond. Nothing ever did. That evening I spotted something. A structure. First I thought it was a shed. Maybe a ranger's cabin. I ran toward it, crashing through the undergrowth. But when I got there, it wasn't what I thought. It was an old wooden shelter, maybe for hunters, weathered, leaning, half collapsed. There were signs someone had built it decades ago. Rusted nails, a metal basin on the ground. I stepped inside, looked around. Nothing useful. No supplies, no water. But it gave some cover from the wind. I spent the night there. That was when I started hearing things again. Louder this time. Branches snapping. Footsteps. I sat still in the dark, knife in hand, heart pounding. The sounds circled me, never too close. I knew animals moved around at night, but this didn't feel right. I didn't see any eyes reflecting in the dark. No shapes. Nothing I could identify. Just the deep fear of something near you that doesn't want to be seen. I left at first light. I started walking downhill, hoping I was heading toward a valley, maybe a stream that could lead to a river or road. I walked for hours. My legs ached. My water filter clogged. I tried to refill from a stagnant pool and vomited an hour later. I was getting weak. I sat under a tree, dizzy, and thought about staying there. But something in me refused to give up. I kept walking. That's when I found the wire. It was thin, rusted, stretched between two trees at waist height. A wire fence, maybe part of an old property line. That meant people had been here once. I followed it, curved through the trees, dipped into a gully, then climbed up again. After another mile, I saw the clearing. A road, not paved, just a wide dirt road. But it was real. I collapsed near the edge, too tired to cry. I dragged myself up and started walking. Just as the sun began to set, I saw a cabin, smoke coming from the chimney. I approached carefully. I didn't know who lived there. Could have been anyone. But I had no choice. I knocked. An old man answered. Didn't say a word. Just looked at me, saw the state I was in, and stepped aside. He let me sleep on his floor, fed me soup, still didn't speak. The next morning he handed me a map, pointed to a red X. That was where I had wandered from. I had gone almost 15 miles off the marked trail, into private land that wasn't monitored anymore. No wonder no one found me. It took 2 more days to get back to my car. When I reached it, there were scratch marks on the driver's side door. Probably an animal, I told myself. But I still don't know. I never went back to that trail. I still hiked. I don't usually write stuff like this, but I feel like I need to. Maybe someone will read it and think twice before making the same mistake I did. I've been hiking for years, not professionally or anything, just something I do to get away. I like quiet trails, long ones where I don't have to see other people. I never cared much for popular routes with signs and crowds. I wanted peace. I wanted nature with no interruptions. That's always how it was, until this one trip in early October that I'll never forget. It was supposed to be a regular solo hike. I took 2 weeks off from work. I planned a long, quiet hike through parts of the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana. I had done parts of it before, but I wanted to go deeper this time, hit some trails I hadn't seen, explore. I packed everything carefully. I had a good pack, a loaded GPS, paper maps as backup, extra food, a water filter, warm gear, a survival knife, and a basic med kit. I wasn't careless. I wasn't new to this. I'd been on over 50 hikes, including a couple of multi-day solo treks. I knew what I was doing, or I thought I did. The first few days went smooth. The weather was just right. Not too hot, not too cold. The air smelled like pine and cold earth, and I was alone the whole time. Exactly what I wanted. No phones, no cities, just dirt, trees, and silence. I had started near a marked trailhead, then slowly worked my way westward on an old Forest Service trail that barely showed up on most maps. I camped near creeks, cooked over small fires, and kept my gear dry. Felt good to be out there. On the 4th day, I was aiming to reach a ridge that overlooked a long, deep valley. From there, I was supposed to curve southward and take a long switchback that would drop me near a forked river. The terrain was rugged but manageable. The trail was faint, but I followed rock cairns and GPS markers. But as I moved up the ridge, I noticed something strange on my map. A dotted line, a path that wasn't part of the official trail system. It showed up faintly on my backup topographic map, almost like it was erased halfway, but it was there. It cut straight across a section of the ridge and dropped down into the valley in a fraction of the time. I stared at that line for a while. It was getting late in the afternoon. If I followed the regular route, I wouldn't make the river until noon the next day. But if I took this dotted line, I could camp near the river tonight and gain an entire day. It seemed like an old game trail or maybe a forgotten footpath. I should have left it alone, but I didn't. I followed it. First, it wasn't bad. A little overgrown, but easy enough to move through. The air was colder as I went deeper. I figured it was the altitude. The trees were taller here, tighter together. Not much light made it to the forest floor. The ground was covered with damp pine needles, and the slope got steeper fast. I used my trekking poles to keep balance, stepping slowly and carefully. I thought I was doing great. Then I realized the trail was fading. About an hour in, the dotted line I had followed so confidently turned into nothing. No trail, no markers, just thick woods and a steep drop in front of me. But I still had the GPS, so I figured I'd be fine. I kept going, using the GPS to aim toward the river. But moving through thick forest without a trail is slow, exhausting work. You have to dodge fallen trees, push through shrubs, watch every step so you don't twist an ankle. By the time the sun started dropping behind the ridge, I knew I'd messed up. I wasn't near the river. In fact, I wasn't even sure I was going the right direction anymore. The GPS had started acting weird, lagging, showing a location, then jumping to another. I kept trying to calibrate it, but the signal was garbage. Maybe too many trees, maybe something else. I don't know. I decided to stop. I found a flat patch under some tall firs and set up camp. I didn't make a fire that night, just ate a protein bar, drank some water, and got in the tent. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No bugs, no birds. I lay there for a while, staring at the nylon roof of my tent, just thinking about how far off I might be. Sometime during the night, I woke up. There was a sound outside. Not animals, not wind. It was rhythmic. Footsteps? No, too slow for footsteps. Too soft, like dragging. I held my breath. Came again. A scrape, then silence, then another scrape. I stayed still. I didn't unzip the tent. I just stayed in my sleeping bag, listening. My heart was pounding in my ears. Whatever it was, it stayed outside the tent for a few minutes. Then it was gone. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I packed fast and started moving again. I didn't care about the shortcut anymore. I just wanted to get back to the real trail. I climbed higher, hoping to get a signal. Nothing. I kept checking the GPS, but the position kept bouncing. I couldn't tell which way was right anymore. Around mid-morning, I found something. A structure. It wasn't a cabin. It looked like an old fire lookout or hunting shack, long abandoned. It was tucked behind a curtain of mossy pines, almost hidden. It had no windows, just a door hanging loose on its hinge. The roof had mostly collapsed, and the wood was black from age and weather. I thought maybe there'd be something inside. A can of food, old maps, anything. So I stepped in. It smelled like wet wood and mold. The floor was soft under my boots. In one corner, there was an old metal stove with a broken pipe. The walls were scratched, deep grooves, like someone dragged something heavy along them. I didn't stay long. There was nothing useful in there, just rot. But when I came back outside, something was different. My footprints from earlier when I approached were gone. I hadn't heard rain. The ground was still dry, but my trail, wiped, like I'd never been there. I felt a tight knot in my gut. Something was wrong, really wrong. I started moving fast. No more slow hiking. I just wanted out. I picked a direction that felt right and pushed through the brush. I scraped my arms on thorns, banged my knees on fallen logs. I didn't care. I just wanted to find a trail. Around noon, I found something again. A trap. Not a normal one. This was big. A metal snare, rusted but strong. Hung between two trees, hidden with moss and branches. Not meant for small animals. Meant for something bigger. It had fresh blood on it. Not old. Not dried. Fresh. That was it. I turned and ran. I ran harder than I had in years. I didn't care where. I just wanted away from that thing. I ran until my legs burned. I tripped twice, landed hard, but got up and kept going. Then I hit a drop. A steep slope covered in loose soil and rocks. I lost my footing and slid, maybe 50 feet, down into a dry creek bed. My left ankle twisted under me, and I yelled. I rolled over, breathing hard, pain shooting up my leg. Couldn't walk right. I tried to tape it with some bandages and get my weight off it, but it wasn't good. I needed help, but I was too far out. No signal. No one knew I was here. I made camp there in the creek bed that night. I built a fire finally. I needed the heat. I needed something human. I sat close to the flames, holding my ankle, feeling stupid and scared. Then I saw something. A figure. Not close. Maybe 100 feet away, barely visible through the trees above the slope. Not moving, just standing. I stared at it. Tried to convince myself it was a tree. Just a tree shaped like a man. But it wasn't there before. And when I looked again, it was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the fire going. I gripped my survival knife, though I knew it wouldn't help much if someone, or something came down that hill. The next day, I tried to move, hobbled along the creek bed using a stick as a crutch. Every few minutes, I had to stop and rest. My water was running low. I had some emergency rations, but not much. Hours passed. I didn't know where I was anymore. Then I heard a sound behind me. Footsteps. Real ones. Human ones. I turned, heart hammering, but saw nothing. Then a voice called out. No, that's a lie. There was no voice. That's what I kept wishing for. A voice. A rescuer. A hiker. A ranger. But it was just me. I started talking to myself, whispering things to stay calm, counting steps, naming trees, anything to stay focused. By late afternoon, I found a sign. A real, weathered wooden sign nailed to a tree. Boundary, Forest Access Trail 4 times 10 to the power of 11. I almost cried. I recognized that trail code. It was on my map. I wasn't out, but I was close. Maybe a day away from the nearest ranger cabin. I followed it, limping, leaning on the stick. Every step was a knife in my ankle, but I didn't stop. That night, I didn't make camp. I just lay down.